appreciate that today you're going to want to really, really take notes, be ready to ask questions at the end. Our whole process in life is how can you make good decisions, especially when you've made some good and you've got a bunch that you want to change.
Hi, everybody. Did you already meet me?
Jay, welcome.
Yeah.
And thank you for being so instrumental in bringing this extremely elite group of speakers to this very intense group of entrepreneurs. Please go ahead. Please.
So Barry and I talk about how I can make every one of our sessions epic, actionable, not just intellectual stimulation. And I just want to set a little stage because I believe, with the very few exceptions that are what I'd call acts of God, everything in our life is the result of actions you take or don't, decisions you make or don't, principles, laws, physics, i.e., and elements that you either recognize the power of and harness, or you let whipsaw you. So we got that established. I believe that in order to make the best reasoned decision on how to optimize any facet of your life, your business, your investment, your health, you have to understand how to optimize. And optimization is highest and best use of time, effort, action, decisions. But you can't optimize until and unless you have a broad enough context of understanding of all or most, or at least many of the different options, opportunities, possibilities, alternatives available, and the pros and cons of each. Most people I meet, very successful people, live their whole life in a band that is their worldview. I've been very blessed because I've done over 1,000 industries around the world, and I've gotten to understand everything from their business models, their strategies, their methodology, product, service, all these things. And so I have a better context of what upside could be, what downside could be, how much more you could do with what you got, how to take what you got somewhere else, how to get control. Barry has talked to me about a lot of you not knowing where to concentrate, what decision is right, where to invest time, effort, opportunity, capital, passion, purpose, possibility. And I've got a lot of thoughts on it, but I get a chance on these sessions to introduce you to some very high level people that I'm privileged to associate with. And the gentleman you're going to now meet is one of my favorites because he's a very, very super intelligent guy. Dr. Alan Barnard is the world authority on the theory of constraints. And he's going to explain it one way, but I'm going to explain it in a pop way. He's going to do it much more scientific and sophisticated. But I believe that everything in our life that we are not achieving, or we don't even know we could be achieving, or we are frustrated because we don't know answers to, or we know answers to where we want to go, but we can't get there, is a function of constraints. And if you understand a log jam, there's always one log that is keeping everything from flowing. And whether you're trying to figure out what direction to go, whether you're trying to figure out where to invest, you're trying to figure out, what's going to rock your boat, anything, there's a constraint to it. One of the constraints that I believe is you don't have the expanse of knowledge, of optionality, of understanding. But another can be you don't see what erroneous perception you are succumbing to. There's all kinds of constraints that I would talk about that are more intangible, but Alan comes from a really different world. He's going to do his very best to bring concreteness, human understanding to a very sophisticated world. And he's a really brilliant man. And the theory of constraint is a very, very powerful concept. It came to bear with a book called The Goal by Dr. Ellie Goldratt, and it transformed a lot of thinking. And that man regrettably died early, but Alan was his number one protege. And now Alan owns and runs the Goldratt Research. And I'm going to do a drum roll and pass the baton. Okay?
Thank you so much, Jay. And thank you so much, Barry, for the opportunity to share this. And amazing pleasure to meet all of you. So my name is Alan Barnard. As Jay mentioned, I run the Goldratt Research Labs, and essentially we do two things. We study why good people make and often repeat bad decisions, and why good people often fail at achieving ambitious but really important targets. So that's what the framework that I'm going to be sharing with you today is How do you go about making an impossible decision? An impossible decision is simply a decision where you have more than one option, and each of these options have got some unique pros and cons, and you don't know how to decide. So you first get stuck, and then you run out of time and you overreact. And the second part is, how do you achieve impossible goals? If you think about decision making, I was once asked in an interview, what's the worst type of decision that somebody could make? Because we all want to focus on the things that really, really matter to us. And I said, of course, when you take your own life or somebody else's life, there's probably no worse decision that you can make. Then it's extremely sad that you think that that's the only viable option. A close second to that is when you make a decision to harm yourself or somebody else, both physically or emotionally. And those are two areas that we work with, is suicide prevention centers and addiction recovery centers, depression treatment. But the last one is the misallocation of your scarcest resources. When you do that, the consequences is massive. I'll give you an example just briefly as some examples of who I've worked with. We did a project with Microsoft and looking at their global end-to-end supply chain of supplying physical products like keyboards, mouses, smartphones, tablets, etc. Within the first year that we started working with them, we had discovered a few small mistakes that they make in the planning and execution of their supply chain. In the same financial year, they got their inventories down by over $250 million and sales up by a few $100 million. And we were 3 people on the project. Very small, but very, very important mistakes that they were making, and very simple corrections of how to fix those mistakes. We've worked, as I mentioned, on the suicide prevention side. Sometimes you get really fascinating cases. We had a guy that sold his business for over $200 million, and 6 months after selling his business, he was suicidal. Every day was a struggle. Why not take my own life? And it's like, how can that be? To try and understand what's really happening. It's very easy to get into that position when you think that life isn't worth living, that from now on you can only make it worse, that you are judging yourself and others will judge you based on your past success, and you know how small the probability was of actually making a success. So when you're writing a new song or writing a new book, you almost immediately get that anxiety, like it's almost going to be impossible for me to match this, So how do you deal with a person like this? And we've also dealt with kids of high net worth individuals, a really tough position to be in. If your dad or mum has been super, super successful, and you think like you could never match up to those expectations, what do I do? How do I find my own place? So those are the type of things that we work with. But what they all have in common is there's a decision that we have to make. We make around 35,000 decisions every single day. Most of those are happening in the subconscious mind. And that, of course, the bad news is that's overwhelming. We suffer from decision fatigue, and there's a whole, lots of research about when is the right time to make a decision, but also what decisions I really should invest some time on. And that to me is the good news. Of all that 35,000 decisions per day, there's very few of them that actually matter. A few of them matter a lot. Getting those right or wrong can change everything for you. So those are the ones that we focus on as a research lab. So if you're thinking about a kid, like what is a decision for a kid that could really, really matter? It's like, how do I deal with abuse or neglect? That decision can change their whole life. It turns out it's not what happens to you that makes the difference. It's the meaning that you give to what happens to you that makes all the difference. So teaching kids how to give different meanings to what happens to them is fundamental. So I'm going to introduce you a very simple framework that we use both to teach kids, but also CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, of figuring out what are the decisions that really matter and what's the best response to those type of decisions. So in terms of just the framework for that, you probably have heard of this framework, but I hope to add some addition to that framework that can really succinct in terms of what the options are. It's called, when we teach it to kids, we say to them, it's hard to if you want to teach anything to become good at, teach it to kids, because their attention span is very small. They are brutally honest. If you bore them, they fall on their hands and sleep, or they start opening up their phones. So it's a brutal feedback mechanism. So we've had to come up with innovative ways of teaching critical thinking, decision making. So what I do is I say to them, do you know that your whole life is governed by a mathematical formula? And then I leave it like that until one kid says, well, what is it? And then I go and write on the board, E+R = O. And I just leave it there until one kid says, well, what does it stand for? I said, well, the E is for events, the R is for response, the O is for outcome. So events plus response equal outcome. I said, well, how does it work? I said, well, you have to decide at any point in time in your life, especially, when you get to that sort of midlife crisis of what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Those are the critical moments, because it forces you to think about, what do I want for the rest of my life? What will give me meaning in my life? What type of partner will make me feel special and safe? So it really gets you to think profoundly about those things. And that's why a midlife crisis is so useful. It forces you to kind of reboot and, okay, now what I'm going to do. So I said to them, look, the outcome is your choice. You can decide what outcome you want. But here's the key. Most people, when they don't get the outcome they want, they blame the events. Right? The events that happen to you are mostly out of your control. And they can be both positive and negative. The only thing that's in your control is your response. So then I say to him, okay, so let's check a little bit. Just let's do the math and see what's the outcomes that we can get. So I want you to think about that. You have a negative event that happened to you, right? Some negative stress in your life, some person said something bad, a product that you launched didn't work out, one of your kids, despite your best efforts, have gotten addicted to drugs, or what, some negative event that has happened to you, and you have a negative response to that. What's the outcome? It's a double negative. You have a negative event that happens to you, but you have a positive response. What happens? At worst, it will be a small negative. At best, it might cancel it out completely. But now think about the opposite. You have a positive event that happens to you, and you have a negative response. Somebody says to you, wow, you look amazing. And you go, what do you want? They give you a compliment, and your immediate reaction is, what do you want from me? Right? It wipes out that positive. We need those positives to balance out with all the negatives. And then, of course, the last part is we have a positive event, we have a positive response, we get a double positive. Now, I call a double negative a hell no decision, right? Those are the things that you want to avoid in life, because they will follow you like a dark cloud. You can't run away from them. They will haunt you and the people that you care about for a long time. The double positives are the things that I call hell yeses, right? You want to capitalize really positive events. It's quite rare. You want to really capitalize on them. So that's a kind of the framework that we give these kids. And of course, the CEOs of 500 companies to say, okay, that is the framework. Now think about what's the mistake that we all make. Is because we have so many events that happen to us every day. It's very hard to distinguish between noise and signal, right? Noise are those things that happen to us to which we shouldn't respond. They're unimportant, that there's nothing I can do about them. It's appeared on CNN, and now there's another mass shooting, there's war in Ukraine. There's nothing I can do about it. It could be positive or negative, but there's nothing I can. So trying to figure out what events should I respond to and what's the best response. So the first one is I'm responding to something I shouldn't. So make sure it's something that actually is important to you and that you can do something about. That's the first advice that we give them. But imagine now you have a list of negative and positive things that have happened to you that you have to respond to. What's the most common mistake that we make? Is we don't respond, we react. Reaction is automatic. It comes very natural, very frictionless, requires no energy. Response requires energy, requires thinking. Thinking is hard work. So what we teach the kids is the reason why we develop reactions is to save energy, right? We go, if this happens, then we do that. We don't have to think about it. Now, if you're in that mode, most of the time, it's fine when you're dealing with things that are not important, right? But when it's an important event that has happened, either positive or negative, and you really care about the outcome, what you want to do is you want to slow down your thinking, sort of press the pause button just quickly before you are tempted to react, which often results in an overreaction or underreaction, and actually think through it. Slow down your thinking to make a faster decision. That's kind of the the counterintuitive part to it. You know, we face these decisions, we procrastinate, we walk around with those dark clouds. What am I going to do with my parents that's now becoming old? You know, am I going to stay married? Do I need to start my own business? Do I need to sell it? Am I going to start another business? These are all things those are life-changing moments that I really know I should prevent myself from just reacting and actually slowing down my thinking and responding to it. Now, what makes it tricky to respond, and then I'll pause a little bit and see if there's any questions, etc., is a couple of things. The first one is there's always at least 2 responses. Do something, don't do something, right? Act, don't act, as Barry mentioned, right? So you always have at least those 2: act, don't act, do something, don't do, or do one thing, do another thing. So there's always at least 2 responses, and that's an important thing to remind yourself of, especially if you think that there's only one option. And somebody that is on the verge of committing suicide thinks that there's only one viable option. The only way to stop the emotional pain is by taking their own life. But that's no different to a CEO whose share price drops down, thinking that the only viable option is to have layoffs, not thinking about the long-term consequences on these people that they've put into position of leading and being responsible for, right? It's the same conceptual mistake. As soon as we think that there's only one viable option, that should be a red flag. There's always at least 2. So just keep that in mind. What makes it tricky is that whatever options I have, always will have, each of these options will have some unique positives or pros and some unique negatives. And it's very seldom that there's a common utility that I can use to compare these, right? So how do I compare chasing a new job that will give me a higher income versus the inconvenience of moving my spouse and kids to a new area? There's no common utility. Of course, you can try to create one like money, but what we teach them is not about to compare these type of things, is to challenge assumptions. And that's the second part, is that, you know, you are always stuck in that mode where you have 2 options and I have to compare these options. Both of them have got unique pros and cons. And then the last part is that it's very difficult to predict the likely positives and negatives. We will always have, you know, incomplete information. We'll never be able to accurately predict what will happen. And then what we give them is the good news. The good news is that even though we are all really bad at predicting the likely outcome of any response, we are actually pretty good at predicting the best case and worst case. And that brings us back to that hell yes and hell no decision, which is a hell no decision is one that has a small upside if it really works, but a big downside if it fails, right? So you take a CEO that's considering, you know, layoffs. In fact, a few years ago, I was phoned by a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I knew of the person, but didn't know the person. And he said, you know, my chairman said I should phone you. I said, okay, thank you so much, but how can I help? He said, well, you know, our share price is down by 10%. I'm thinking about laying off 10% of the people. And he said, he thinks it's a bad idea. I should speak to you. So I said, well, so let me just understand. So you've asked your team to commit to a target, say 100, you've reached 90. So your conclusion is that they must now have 10% too much resources. And that's why you think it's only reasonable to say, give back the 10%, right? We should lay off 10% of the resources. He said, yes, that's a good explanation. Can you phone my chairman and explain it to him like that? I said, no, I didn't say it was a good decision. I just said, I understand how you think that this is a good option. I said, but let me ask you a question. These people that you're thinking about laying off, what percentage do their costs make up of your total revenues? And he said, well, you know, they're about 20% of my revenues, so 10% reduction on that is going to give me 2% on my net profit. I said, okay, what's the downside? So that's the best case upside, right? Is your net profit will go up by 2%. Best case upside. What do you think the downside is going to be? The next 6 months, your team won't be thinking about growing that business. They'll be thinking about who to lay off in a fair way so that we won't get sued. Your best people will likely leave because they don't want to have that uncertainty, right? Your competition will probably grab the best people and capitalize on the opportunity to tell their customers, you see, they can't trust you. What's the maximum downside? Is it a bit more than 2% on profit? And he went, oh shit, it is a lot. And that to me is a hell no decision to say that we are not very good at predicting the likely positive and negative, but we're pretty good at predicting the best case and the worst case. And a really bad decision is where the best case is a small upside and the worst case is a huge downside. Stay the hell away from those things. But it's incredible how often we do that. You know, somebody's partner cheats on them, right? It feels like it's the most horrible thing that can happen to you. Now the question is, what should I do? And the automatic response is, I must divorce them. Really? Is that the best option? Does it have a huge upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't? Or is it the opposite? The hell yes decisions are ones that have big upside if it works, small downside if it doesn't. Now, so before I pause for the questions, it's like, that's kind of, for me, the framework of thinking about these. We make tons of decisions every single day. The good news is most of them don't matter, but a few of them matters a lot. And when you're in that position, either because you're in a midlife crisis, but there's something that happens that tells you now is the time to make a really important decision. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? It's really useful to have a very simple framework by which to make these decisions. And E+R = O is a great framework because it boils it down to the bare simplicity. To say you can't control the events that happen to you. There will be positives and negatives. If you're lucky, you'll get more positives than negatives. But all of us will go through a period of our time where it feels like there's a series of negatives. The insight that you must have is that it's never good to respond negatively. It's never good to just react in automatic mode. Those cases, you want to slow down your thinking and make sure that you select an option that has a big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't. And stay the hell away from those options that have only a small upside if it works and a big downside if it doesn't. So I'll pause there. The next part of my discussion is going to say, okay, so what does this have to do with constraints, right? Well, one of the things that make decisions hard is because we have limited resources. We have lots of things that demand our attention, demand our time, our money, etc., and we have scarce resources. So how I allocate those scarce resources and why it's so critical, that's the part that affects us in achieving what we often think of as impossible goals. So I'll pause there and find out if there's any questions from anybody. Barry, Jay.
Yeah, for me, I thought you did a really nice job of humanizing it. Now he's going to take off the governors and he's going to take it to a much more amped level of sophistication. But anybody got a question?
One small thing. This topic is so important. I don't think we can cover it all today, but and I so much appreciate what you've already stated. We have a whole bunch of research over the years on just this topic. I'd love to collaborate. But one of the things that we found out is that you can have, as an individual, you can have one decision that this is the right answer, or it could be this other answer. And then the truth almost always, especially when it's between two people, is a third answer that no one else ever thought of, but that actually satisfies both people's intention from the beginning, which they didn't know because they were in your reaction phase. How do you get them to look at that, or how individually, as you're going through your day, to recognize I'm just taking a position reaction? Actually, I'd love to know the process to get to that third space. I have a process here in my whole, all my research, but to get people to understand that you need to do that hasn't been too encouraging.
So just as an answer to that, so one of the apps that we've developed, so what we do is we study why good people make bad decisions, often repeated. If we find an answer, we turn it into a decision support method. And then if we know that that method works, we turn it into an app. So one of the apps that we've developed is called Harmony Decision Maker. And probably, Barry, you'll resonate with that. Harmony is such an important concept. You know, we shouldn't strive for balance. We should strive for harmony, where everything is moving in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we call it harmony, is that when you face these tough decisions and you end up overreacting or procrastinating on them, it causes disharmony in your life between yourself, within yourself, and with you and others. So how do we get somebody to make a good decision to explore more options, right? As you mentioned, there's always a third option. Well, it turns out that there's always 4 options. So if you think about the decision of saying change versus not change, right? The change has its own unique pros and cons. The not change has got its own unique pros and cons. So whether that change represents stop my addiction, right? Stop smoking so much, eating so much, using the drugs, gambling, whatever is the thing that you use as the solution to your emotional pain versus continue doing that, right? Those are my 2 options. The changes stop, the no changes to continue. Each of these have got pluses and minuses. So what we do is in our method, we help the person think through 4 different options, new options. We say, why is change, stop smoking, for example, why is it not a viable option? Well, it means you have to give up the positive that you associate uniquely with your addiction, right? So the fear of losing that positive, which could be, what's the positive of smoking? I think it helps me to cope with stress. So what's blocking you from giving up the addiction is not the fact that you don't know that there's a major positive if you stopped or major negative if you continue. It's the fear of losing the stress coping mechanism. Exactly. Now, what happens is really important is as soon as you answer that question, say, so what is this unique positive of continuing to smoke? Well, it helps me to cope with stress. As soon as you write it down in your workbook or you type it into an app, it transfers that belief from the subconscious to the conscious mind. You can't challenge an assumption when it's in the subconscious mind. You can only challenge it if it's in the conscious mind. So as soon as you write it down there, what you'll find is your brain can't help but go, is that really true? Does smoking actually help me to cope with stress, right? Or am I just addicted to nicotine, which is most likely the case? Or even if it does, is there not a better way of doing it? So what we call the first option is, I call it change plus plus. I said, you're going to make the change, you're going to stop smoking, but for it to be a viable option, you have to add something. So you don't have to give up the positive of not changing, which is, how else can I cope with stress? Maybe start meditating. Okay, but that's not the only thing. There's another reason why it's not a viable option, is there's a unique negative of stopping smoking, which might be that I'm afraid that I will gain weight, or I'm afraid that I will lose my friends. Okay, what can I add, the second plus, to make it a viable option? And that's option number 1. Option 2 says, do the same with a not change. Not change plus plus. So what must I add to not changing so I don't give up the unique positive of changing or have to live with the negative of not changing? And then we go for a third option. This is when and when not to change. What is the thing that must happen for you to be very clear, to make it very easy for you to decide whether to change or not to change? What is that condition? So as long as the following is true, I stay with my husband. As soon as this happens, what is that? Then I will leave. Okay, that's a third option. And then the fourth option is another change. Now that I understand what I really want, I want to keep the pros of both options, but I don't want the negatives of either. Is there another change that has nothing to do with maybe buying a new IT system if I was in a company versus using the legacy system? Maybe the other change is outsource the whole thing. So what we do both in our teaching method, but also in our app, is we allow a person to develop at least 4 new options that they previously didn't consider, each one of those better than the change versus no change, or change A versus change B. And then we get them to select what's the best option of that 4, the one with the biggest upside if it works, smallest downside if it doesn't.
Great. Thank you.
And Barry, I would love to collaborate on the research. It sounds like there's a lot of overlap between what we do.
Yeah, please, after the thing with talk.
Anybody
else have a question? Jay?
I'm sorry, I was talking and I had it on mute. I said, I think it's going to get really interesting now because Alan's going to take you now into his real world. And I've asked him to keep going back and forth to deal with some of the issues that you and I, Barry, talked about. But I think when you see what his work is all about and his belief on what the most precious resource is and how to think at a much higher level of possibility and optionality, it's going to get really interesting. At least it better, Alan, right?
Yeah, yes. So So that hopefully covers just a brief framework of how do you help yourself or somebody else make an impossible decision. An impossible decision, like I said, is just one where you've got at least two options. Each of them have got unique pros and cons, and you end up either overreacting or underreacting. That framework that I shared is a very simple framework of doing that. I call the method a pro-con cloud. It's kind of like a pro-con list on steroids, the next iteration of Benjamin Franklin's pro-con list. And for those that are interested, you can download the app Harmony Decision Maker for free from all the app stores. It will guide you through the process with just a couple of questions. But the second area that I'm really passionate about is how do you achieve an impossible goal? And here I've got a story for you. A couple of years back, I was asked by a mining company to go and teach them about theory of constraints, how to find the bottleneck or the constraint in your organization and how to overcome it, etc. And I walked in there and I saw a group of 60 miners sitting with their arms crossed, not looking very open to being lectured by some academic. And I thought, oh my goodness, if I show them my slides, they're going to throw me out. So just before we started, there was a little coffee area. And I said, so why does everybody look so angry? And I said, well, the whole thing is, we have a target of achieving 12 million tons this year. I said, okay. And where are you at the moment? He said, well, we're in month 4, we are only at 3 million tons. We're already 1 million tons behind. We'll end up the year at 9 million tons. I said, and what will happen if you only end up with 9 million? He says, it will be chaos. We will have to pay penalties on contracts. We'll probably get massive layoffs. Most of us will be fired. I said, okay. So I walked into the room and I said, look, so I was planning to present these bunch of slides, but let's focus on what the real problem is. And I drew this graph. I said, you have to get to 12 million tons in 12 months. At month 4, you're only at 3 million tons. If we extrapolate from that big gap, right? And the consequences of that gap is going to be massive. Now, you can apply that immediately. It's always a good starting point to understand how big is the performance or expectation gap in your business or your life, and check what's the consequences of that expectation or performance gap if you can't close it, right? And in their case, so that's always my step one is, are we dealing with an important problem or not, right? In their case, it was absolutely important. So I said, okay, what I want you to do as an exercise just quickly is I want you on a flip chart page to write down all the things that are currently consuming your scarcest resources, your time, your budget, etc. Just give it a name, right, and put it on the side of the wall. When they got to about 100, it was a large mining company. When they got to about 100, I said, okay, we have enough. I said, okay, now I'm going to ask you a really, really simple but very, very important question. I said, we've just agreed that your number one problem is that you don't have enough tons. You need to find a way of increasing the tons. Right now, for you, it is whatever the goal is that you've set for yourself, right? And how far away from that goal you are, that is your number one problem, is how to close that gap. So I said, I want you to go and write on each of those pages of the flip chart, how many more tons that initiative, the thing that's consuming your scarcest resources, will give you. Can you guess what the outcome is? Out of the 100 change initiatives that was happening in that mining company, how many of those change initiatives do you think will actually increase the number of tons that the mine is producing? We found 4. Right? Now, I want you to think about all the things that take up your scarcest resources every single day. How many of those things are actually helping you to achieve the goal that you are so passionate about? And a mentor of mine, Dr. Ellie Goldratt, had a brilliantly simple definition of a life goal. He said a life goal is just a dream taken seriously. It takes courage to have a dream. It takes even more courage to take it really seriously. To evaluate every single day, am I still making progress towards that goal? And that to me is like these midlife crises are fantastic because it forces you to think about, what was my dream originally? How do I get distracted from that? How do I take it really, really seriously? I'm maybe 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. How much time do I have left? I could make meaningful progress on that thing. So that was the first thing that we almost always do, regardless of what constraint is involved. And I'll share with you just the types of constraints that you can get. The first thing is stop doing the things that's not helping. or not helping a lot, because as Nick and Jay mentioned, there's an opportunity cost. By doing this, you're not doing many other things. And we literally got them that out of that 100 initiatives, they stopped 50 of them. And that's pretty a good rule of thumb, that at least 50% on your to-do list, if you really evaluate them, you can actually stop. And it will have almost no negative impact. The other remaining ones, you could find ways of delegating, automating, whatever, and you're going to be left with a few things that can make a big difference. But now the question is, okay, now we've stopped, which means we've actually made available some of the scarce resources to start doing the things that would really matter. So what are those? And I called up the manager of the first operation in the mining operation, which is basically exposing the ore. And I said, look, let's do some calculations. You're currently at 3 million. You need to get to 12 million. You've got, essentially 8 months left. You need to produce at about 1.25 million tons a month. How are you going to do that? Now, bearing in mind, I'm standing there. At that stage, I had no mining experience, right? So I'm asking this guy, how are you going to do that? And he looks at me and he goes, it's bloody impossible. Else we would have done it. Now think about, how do you reply if you hear yourself or one of your team members say something is impossible? Do you know why we say something is impossible? It's a protection mechanism. Because then we don't even have to try. We don't even have to think about it, right? It's a brilliantly simple protection mechanism. Gets us off the hook. We just say something, it's impossible. So here I'm standing in front of this guy. I have no idea. I can't help him come up with some silver bullet of how to increase the throughput in his mind. But at that moment, what came to my mind is I said to him, it's impossible unless. Now, I want you to think about that. Take any target that you think is impossible, whether it's to have a happy marriage or a meaningful life or kids that respect you, whatever it is that you think are almost impossible, and ask yourself, it's impossible unless. And what you'll find is, in psychology, we call this a disruptive question. It actually disrupts the brain pattern. It prevents us from staying in automatic mode. And what you'll see happens is your mind will go into problem-solving mode, and you'll come up with a list of reasons. Now, every one of those reasons is a condition that can make the impossible possible. It's impossible unless I can do this. It's impossible unless I can get them to do this. It's impossible unless. And very quickly, we had a couple of unless conditions written down. We did the numbers, to see if it's worthwhile. Is the upside going to be much more than the potential downside? And literally within an hour of repeating that process for every process in their mining operation, and then repeating it amongst different levels, because every level of management has different insights about these unless conditions, we had them come up with a clear plan that would potentially get them to 14 million tons with a buffer of about 2 million. So that the worst case scenario was they could still hit the 12 million. So that's the simplest possible way that I can share with you in this short time. How do you achieve impossible goals? Is you start off with a goal. If you think it's realistic, you will not challenge any of your assumptions. The reason why you think it's realistic, because you think you know how to do it. The same if it's your team or if you're working with a customer. You have to get yourself to state the goal in a way that it makes it impossible, either by increasing the magnitude or by reducing the time you give yourself. Once you have the goal and there's agreement in the room that now it's impossible, right? Then ask yourself, it's impossible unless. So I'll leave you with that. And then the last part that I want to talk about is a little bit is when we allocate resources, scarce resources, we make one of four mistakes. We use those scarce resources to do the wrong thing, things that don't help. And that's why I always start with that, like in the mining case. Is write down all the things that's consuming your scarcest resources and see.
Alan, excuse me, Alan, tell him what
Yes.
the resolve was in the mine.
Sorry, thanks, Jay. You always remind me of this story. I'm much more excited as a research scientist about the repeatable process that we developed from that. But the results were outstanding, right? I ended up achieving about 13 million tons. It was the first time in 10 years that they got paid bonuses. There was no layoffs that year. It set them up to invest, to have the working capital to invest, to go to the next level. And it was a massive, massive success story. I still get sort of goosebumps when I think about it. And it's like you return there 6 months later and the energy is just completely different. And now they use the simple process for everything. It's impossible unless. What will make the impossible possible? So just getting back to the 4 mistakes. The number 1 mistake is what I did with them first, is write down all the things that's consuming your scarcest resources and see, is this really helping me make progress towards the goals that are important to me? And if not, then stop them. If you can, automate them, delegate them, do whatever the hell it takes, but get to that point where there's only a few things, because that's then the question, what must I start doing that can make a difference? That's the second mistake, is we don't do the things that can make a big difference. Those small changes that Jay is so good at, if I'm in a business, how can I get my customers to pay more, buy more frequently? I have a $100 million business. I have 5 million in net profit. If I can get my average selling price to go up by just 1%, that 1% will give me an additional $1 million worth of revenue. There's no increase in variable cost, no increase in OPEX or CAPEX. It will drop to my bottom line. My bottom line will go from 5 million to 6 million. That's a 20% increase in net profit for every 1% increase in the average selling price. What's the simplest way of increasing my average selling price? Just stop giving away discounts unnecessarily, right? So that's the second part, is find those few things that make a big difference. The third mistake is we do the right things, but in the wrong way. And that's what Jay mentioned during the introduction, is I have 3 things to do. How can I do them in the wrong way? As I multitask, I try to do all 3 of them at the same time. And the way that you can visually picture this is, imagine 3 boxes of the 3 things that you have to do. Maybe for the next month, each of them takes 10 days, right? So if you did them one by one, you would do A, it will take you 10 days. Do B, it will take you 10 days. So you'll complete it at day 20. And do C, it'll take 10 days. You'll complete it at day 30. So the highest priority thing you managed to do in 10 days, the second highest priority thing you managed to do in 20 days, but the work time was 10. And the third highest priority thing you completed on day 30. Now imagine what happens if you are multitasking. You do a bit of A, then you switch over to B, then to C, and you do that every single day. And even if there was no switching cost, which normally there's about 50% of your time is now wasting figuring out where the hell was I on A, when I got back to C, and having to report progress, etc. But the consequences of that, even if there's 0 switching cost, is you'll complete all 3 in about 30 days. Does it make sense to everybody? Give me a thumbs up if you're still following, right? Now, what the hell did you gain from this? Your highest priority project A is now taking you 30 days to complete. You could have done it in 10 days if you just focused and finished, right? The second highest one also took 30 days. You could have had it done by 20 days. Now, when you add the switching cost to that, and that we do a little simple exercise. If we have more time, we can do that, right? As you'll find out that those 3 things that you thought would take 30 days end up taking 60 days because of the switching cost. And why do we multitask? A very simple bad assumption, which is behind all bad decisions, right? When we see a bad decision, we have 3 conclusions. Bad decision means bad person, right? You can blame yourself, somebody else, not that useful. Will provide you a bit of relief from the stress and anxiety, but not that useful to do that. Or you can say bad decision, ignorant person. Very simple to check if it's an ignorant person that's the cause of the bad decision, is you educate them and see if it changes their decision. Most of the time it doesn't. The third reason, bad decision, good person with a bad assumption, right? That's by far the majority of the bad decisions come from good people with bad assumptions.
Alan, I'm going to interrupt just for 1 second.
Sure.
Some of these people come from the Tony Robbins world, and Tony Robbins and I do, 1 day together every year with his high-end groups. And I'm usually the second commentary, Tony's first, and they'll go off on something, and then I'll do this little intervention, and I'll say, well, let's just wait a minute. You guys are predicating this on an assumption, but if the assumption is wrong, everything that flows from it is wrong. Pick up. I just wanted to make that point.
Absolutely. So if you think about why do we multitask, I think 20 years back, we still thought that was the best way to be productive, right? People were actually hired because of their ability to multitask. But today we know the research is overwhelming. It's a really, really bad idea. And yet we still all multitask. Why? Because there's a very deep assumption in our subconscious, which says the sooner I start something, the sooner I will finish it. Do you all agree?
Yes.
The sooner I start something,
Yes,
the sooner I will finish it. That is absolutely true if I do one thing. As soon as I do two or more things, it's not true. The opposite is true. So I want you to picture that case, right, little Gantt chart. A is 10 days, B is 10 days, C is 10 days. Or the other Gantt chart, which is ABC, 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 every day switching, right? And everything takes 30 days. My assumption is that the sooner I start B, the sooner I will finish it. Is that really true? I start B on day 1 because I'm multitasking, but I finish it on day 30. Whereas in the first example, if I focused and finished, I would start B on day 11 and I'll finish it on day 20. The later I start, the earlier I finish. Does it make sense?
Yes.
That's the core reason why we multitask. It's not because we don't know the research or we don't trust the research. It's because we've never paid attention to what is the good assumption behind our need and desire to multitask. Now, there's a couple of other assumptions as well, depending on the culture. One of them is that it's impolite to say no or not now. Right? So if that's your personality, or your team's personality, you have to be very careful. You have to create a safe environment for them to say no or not now. So one of the things I teach my team is as soon as I ask you to do something, right, new, my assumption should be you're probably already busy. Ask me, what can I stop doing? That will force me to give you the right priorities and to make sure that you're focusing on the highest priority. So that's just the third mistake is we do the right things, but in the wrong way. We multitask. And the principle I want you to take away here is it's much more important to prioritize and focus and finish than how you prioritize. If that makes sense. If I was multitasking, those 3 things would have probably taken me 60 days. By prioritizing and focusing and finishing, I got everything done in 30 days. But by far the most important, the highest priority one I got done in 10 days. So it's more important to prioritize than how I prioritize, because even if I got the priorities completely the wrong way around, if I prioritize C over A, I would have still finished A in 30 days and not 60 days. So I hope that makes sense. The last part I just want to quickly talk about is, so what is your constraint? What's the scarcest resource that you have? When you ask that question to people or to businesses, they say it's money, it's time, it's knowledge, but there's things that are much scarcer than that. And we had a big aha moment when we started working with the biggest companies in the world, and we say, well, what's constraining them from achieving profitable growth? There's basically 4 types of constraints that you can get, right? You set a goal in profitability if you're a for-profit business, or if you're for-purpose business, you've set a goal of how many people to help by when, right? Or how much money to make by when. That's your goal. As soon as you've set the goal, then you can determine what do I need to achieve that goal. And you need 4 things. The one is you need enough customers to buy your product or service to meet the goal. So the first question is, do I have enough customers? Right? That want my product or service, whether I'm for profit or for purpose. If not, you have a market constraint. Guess what's your one thing? Focus on that. Focus on getting enough customers. Figure out using Jay's, framework of what can I do? What are the conditions if I can satisfy that would get more customers to buy more, pay more, buy more frequently? That becomes your one thing to do. Well, if I have enough customers, then what? What if I don't have enough capacity to meet the demand from these customers? Then that becomes the one thing. Where's the internal bottleneck in my own operations? Well, if I have enough customers, I have enough capacity, then what? It could be supply. There's some scarce raw material I need, or some skill or external resource. If you don't have enough of that to meet the goal, then that becomes the one thing. And the last part is, of course, I often need cash to be able to buy these critical things that I need. If I don't have enough cash, that becomes the constraint. Now, what makes real world situations much more complicated is that we often find ourselves in a situation where we've overcommitted and now I don't have enough of anything. I don't have enough customers. I don't have enough capacity. Even if I got the customers, I don't have enough supply. I don't have enough cash. It's a chaotic system. It's impossible to make reliable predictions in such a system. It's impossible to manage it because the bottleneck is moving all the time. The constraint is moving all the time. So what do you do in that extreme case? Very counterintuitively, you lower the goal. You lower the commitment that you've made until there's only a single constraint in the system. A point where you now have enough capacity, you have enough supply, you have enough cash, but you don't have enough customers. Then that becomes the one thing for you to focus on. And as soon as you get enough, you'll start seeing everything starts flowing. And that's where the analogy with what Barry is doing in terms of energy, any system flourishes when energy flows. When things flow, when there's not stopping and starting, it's the highest level of any system, whether you're a business, where the stuff, the work and the materials and the goods are just flowing through the system, you get the highest productivity and profitability when there's maximum flow. But you can't have maximum flow in a system that's unstable, that's chaotic. So reduce your goal until one thing becomes a constraint, focus just on that to be able to get more of that, and then systematically start increasing the goal as the capability of the system becomes stronger and stronger. And that's by far the fastest way. And that's when we deal with most organizations, they're in a chaotic state. There's more than one thing that they don't have enough of, and it's constantly changing. They don't know where to focus. They don't know how to make reliable commitments. It's impossible to make a reliable commitment when you don't have enough of anything. So how do I get there? Reduce the goal, go slower, and by that, I'm actually speeding up. So the last point I just want to make is, so what is our constraint? What was our big conclusion? Well, think about yourself as even if you're the biggest company in the world, right? You're a Tesla, you're a Walmart, etc. Do you think that the size of the market is actually constraining your business growth? Even the biggest companies in the world has got 1 or 2% of the world market. So it can't be that. Do you think that there's not enough capacity in the world to meet that demand? No, it can't be that. Not enough supply? No. Not enough cash? No. So what is actually constraining a business? And what our conclusion is, there was one resource that always satisfies the criteria for constraint, which is I don't have enough of it to meet the demand. It's your limited management attention. The number of things that demand your attention every day will always exceed your available attention. So how you allocate your limited attention is absolutely critical. There's two other things that can become constraints, which is we also have limited trust. For some reason, we can't trust everybody. There's just not enough trust in our cognition. And the last one is motivation or energy. And by far the biggest mistake is not giving things our attention that we shouldn't, or trusting people that we shouldn't. By far the biggest mistake is not giving the attention to the people that we should, not trusting the people that we should, not using our limited motivation and energy to do the things that we should. So theory of constraints is really just provides a framework of saying, define a goal in your system, identify where the constraint is. What is it? Is it the market? Is it capacity? Is it supply? Is it cash? Or is it management attention? Then how do I exploit that scarce resource and not waste it? What can I stop doing to get more of it available? How do I stop overbuying, overspending, overproducing, over servicing customers that are not profitable? That's deciding how to better exploit the constraint and not waste it. Step 3 says subordinate everything to that decision. Any policy or process or measurement that you have in your business that's in conflict with that decision. So you might have a process for taking orders once a week, but customers hate waiting a week. But the weekly ordering process makes you internally efficient. That's a form of local optimization. If you have a market constraint, do whatever the heck you must do to make sure that your customers don't have to wait. If that could give you more sales or higher prices, etc. So that's step 3 in the 5 focusing steps of period constraints, subordinate everything to the above decision on how to better exploit and not waste a scarce resource. Only go and change those policies, measurements, behaviors that's in conflict with that decision. If it's still a constraint, do step 4, which is elevate, go and get more. If you have a market constraint, that means going to add more products or services, or take your existing products or services into new markets. That's a way of elevating a market constraint, or buying additional machines, or hiring additional salespeople, or getting other investors to give you cash, or buying from other suppliers. Those are all ways of elevating, but always exploit before you elevate. Always make sure you first utilize what you've got to the maximum before you go and add more. And then the last step is part of the ongoing improvement, which is constraints will move. So warning, don't let inertia become your constraint. Inertia is mostly driven by fear. Right? Go back to step 1, find out what the new constraint is. And that provides you with a systemic way of constantly getting more and more of the goals that's important to you, to your business, whether it's for profit or non-profit. So I'll pause there and open it up for any questions.
Alan, hold on. I thought that was great. I want to make a point, and I want you to talk about it, because I always think that a big constraint is lack of recognition of optionality. That most people spend too much time in too little band of expansive understanding. And so the reference frame is based just on what they've experienced and what they know, not what's possible. And I'm going to tell a story, and it's a really simplistic one, and then I'll let you pick up on it. I mean, I've got 1,000 industry expanse, so I can see all kinds of alternative ways of doing everything: strategy, business model, paths, everything. But I'll never forget when I first started working with Tony Robbins 30-some years ago. I went to one of his big programs, and he always did intervention. And a man came up, and he was lamenting that he tried everything to figure out a better way to prosper. And Tony, he was young then, but he went over everything. And the guy said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, tell me the last 20 or 30 business opportunity trainings that you've explored, and then tell me the last, 50 or 60 business brokers you've talked to, and then tell me about maybe the last couple hundred businesses that you've evaluated, and then tell me about the career training that you've pursued, and then tell me about the advanced training you've pursued in your own job." And by the time he got through this litany, the guy melted into tepid water and sort of rolled back to his seat, because he'd done 3 or 2 or no things. And I think a lot of us don't realize that our constraints oftentimes are a byproduct of our either unwillingness and awareness that there's so much more out there in terms of optionality that gives us this ability to create this "it's impossible unless." Why don't you speak to that a minute?
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a quote by Tony Robbins sort of really summarizes that well. When he says it's seldom the lack of resources, it's mostly the lack of resourcefulness.
Yeah, I agree.
So yes, you have real constraints in terms of time and money and knowledge and limited attention and trust and motivation. These are real resources that from time to time will be overloaded. But it's your inability to first exploit what you've got better. How much more can I do just with what I've got? And I'll give you an example. I'll give you 2 examples that you can think about. Think about the decision making, right? How long does it take you to make a typical decision that's a life-changing decision? And it's a trick question, because what I'm asking for is really 2 different times. The one is the elapsed time. From the moment that you realize, I now need to decide what the hell am I going to do with the rest of my life? Or how am I going to deal with my parents that, want to cling on to staying in their home when they really should be in a retirement village? My dad really shouldn't be driving. So from the moment that you realize you have to now make a decision until you make it, how long does it normally take? And what you'll find is that don't be surprised when it's months and sometimes years. How long does it actually take you to make the decision when you have everything that you need to make the decision? A few hours. That is the potential improvement potential for how much faster we could make decisions. If we focused on what is the outcome I want, what's the events that make it complicated, what's my options for responses, what's the best option, sitting down, doing the analysis, doing the hard work. The same is true for lead time. If you think about, You order a computer and it takes them 4 weeks to get to you, or you order a new passport and it takes them 3 months to get to you. How long do you think it actually takes them to produce that computer or that passport? A few minutes, a few hours? That's the magnitude of the improvement that's possible when we're thinking about what is actually causing us to take so long. What's the main causes of delays? How much delays are there that's avoidable? And by how much can I compress it down if I can get rid of those avoidable delays? One of the apps that we've developed is called the Project Portfolio Digital Twin. So imagine reading in a complete portfolio of any big project that you're working on, an IT project, construction project, or a whole series of projects. One of our customers is Amazon Robotics. What this digital twin does is you're reading that whole structure, work breakdown structure of all the projects, but you add randomness to the task durations. You press the play button and it shows you the likely outcome after running thousands of replications of by how much these projects will be over time and over budget. And then what we do is we analyze what are all the avoidable delays that happened when the work was waiting for resources or waiting for decisions. And you often find that even in the most kind of high performance environments like Amazon Robotics, you can squash projects by typically minimum 25%, sometimes up to 75%. Now imagine you did a construction project in half the time, or new product development in half the time, or making a big decision about how best to grow your business in half the time or a fraction of the time. That's the magnitude of the improvement that's possible if time is the constraint. If it's some resource, the only thing I normally do is I say, if I go into an area that I have no intuition about, like what we did originally in mining, is I ask them to compare the best day versus the average day. And normally the best day is typically 50%, sometimes 100% better than the average day. That shows you the magnitude of improvement potential if they could just figure out what are the conditions that made us achieve the best day ever. Now, we use that same technique when we're dealing with people that are facing severe depression. We ask them, tell me about your best day ever. How much better was that best day ever than your average day? That's the magnitude of the improvement that's possible in your life. And then we ask them the simple question, what made that best day possible? And how can you put those conditions in place every day? What were you doing? Who were you with? Right? So that's kind of the generic process behind it, is if you find that there's a constraint, don't immediately jump to getting more of that resource. Find how to squeeze more out. But how do I know how much more I can squeeze out? Just to compare the best day ever versus the average day. That tells you the magnitude of the improvement possible that you already have.
Alan, you were great. Anybody have questions for Alan? Barry, you got comments?
I got a question.
I definitely have a comment, but I'd let someone else ask a question, and then I have a couple questions. Yes.
So, Alan, I have a couple of questions. This was beautifully framed. I mean, I think a lot of us know the gist of what you're saying, but the way you framed it is magnificent. A little bit of curiosity. When it came to those miners and it came down to agreeing to the 4 initiatives, was that universal, or were there outliers to that 4?
I think that there's, everybody has got their pet project, right? So that's one of the things that you have to overcome. So what we try to do there is to say, it's kind of the same thing that I developed. You've heard of this thing that's mainly in the public service called spend it or lose it. You've heard of that thing, right? You're facing this horrible decision. You've got a budget of 10 million. You've been prudent a whole year. You get in the final month, you have $1 million left. What do I do? Do I return it back to the treasury so that they can put it to the most important initiative, or do I spend it? And most people have to spend it, because else they won't just lose it this year, they'll lose it next year. So I developed an alternative. I call it save it and share it, which is essentially, if you have $1 million left at the end, you can keep half of that and spend it on whatever you think is the highest priority area in your department without any negative consequences. And the other half you return to the treasury, where it can focus on those departments or those agencies that unfortunately were put in a position where the demand on their budget was greater than what they had available. So it's kind of the same thing as when you realize that there's a pet project and you check are you willing to give that up? Is it really helping you to increase stunts? And they come up with good reasons, right? Good reasons. You get to that point where you say, okay, how can you do that with a minimum disruption, right? How much do you really need to make some meaningful progress there? So we had a bit of that, but out of the 100, basically we stopped 50. The 50 that was remaining, we identified the 4 that would make by far the biggest impact on tons. We made sure that we weren't multitasking with those, that we were doing focusing and finishing, doing one first, get it done, get the results back, right? Then do number 2, get the results back. And the rest was essentially time bucketing and cost bucketing to say, okay, we expect you to spend 4 days out of every week on those core initiatives. The 5th day, you have the luxury to determine what's your priority based on a local consideration.
Excellent. And the other thing, since you framed things so beautifully, how do you define multitasking?
Great. This was a really tricky one. Because the common definition is multitasking is when you do multiple things at the same time, but cognitively you can't, right? So my definition of multitasking is multitasking is when I switch from a high priority task to a low priority task when I could have continued to make progress on the high priority task. So that hopefully removes all the confusion. There's never good multitasking. It's only bad. Now, when should I switch? If the priorities have changed, then you must switch. It makes no sense to force somebody to keep working on something just because they started that one first when the priorities have changed. And secondly, when you can't make any further progress, then I want you to switch to the next high priority task. But please do not switch if you can continue to make meaningful progress on the highest priority task.
Excellent. Thank you.
The problem that people keep coming up with is that they're working completely as hard as they can. They are taking everything and putting it into what they call the top priority. And that's what needs better definition, because today is, say, whatever day it is. Are you in South Africa or are you US? Where are you located?
I'm currently in the US. I moved to the US in September 2020 permanently. Yeah.
Nice, nice. I love Cape Town. Work there at Stellenbosch. But anyway, people have this wonderful self-confidence and verve, and then they start to slow down, and they don't realize they're slowing way down in terms of their effectiveness. Yeah. And yet they say, well, I'm doing the most urgent thing. And there's 2 questions here. 1, I don't think that's true. 2, I think that that's what they picked last week was the priority of the thing that was most urgent, top priority. And 2, things are always changing every day. And if there isn't some way to put in what has changed today, then it's not possible to take the 80-20 rule and throw out the stuff that no longer is relevant today in terms of your goal. And this means stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, which I know sounds like you're switching, but actually you're denuding or you're deleting all of a sudden something which no longer is as relevant as what today is. Now, was that too much?
No, absolutely, Barry. I think it fits in with my definition. If the priority does change, you must switch,
But they don't look. No one looks. No one has a technique to look every day. But everyone comes in saying, I'm working. Go ahead. Please.
Exactly. But what I normally start with, I say, just be careful with prioritization, right? Prioritization just changes the sequence in your list. It doesn't shorten the list. Right? You have to start by shortening the list.
Can you say more about that? That's very interesting. What do you mean by shortening it? To what?
Literally just, there's 100 things on my to-do list, right? That's demanding my attention. That's demanding my motivation, my energy. Right. That you have to stop those things that are not helping or not helping a lot. So a question that we teach is how is this helping this thing? How is it helping me achieve the goals that are most important to me? And second question, as importantly, even if it is helping, what am I giving up by doing this? Am I giving up something that could have helped even more? And that's, to me, that's a good, those 2 questions are good at prioritization. One, the first question by itself is not sufficient. is because a lot of things can help, but it really helps to prioritize when you say, well, by doing this thing first, what am I giving up? Is what I'm giving up not something that could have helped a lot? And there's always 80-20, right? And 80-20 is fractal. I don't know if you for most of you know that term. It's basically self-similar. So I can say 20% of my customers generate 80% of my sales. But of the 20% of the customers, 20% of those, so 4, generates 80% of the 80%, which is 64. And then there's often 20% of the 20%. So now I'm at one customer, either generates 50% of my sales or profitability, or it generates 50% of the potential for improvement. So it's always that thing of finding those few things that matter a lot and stopping the many things that matter a little, the trivial. Yes. So it's not bad because they don't help. It's because they don't help a lot.
Yeah.
Focus only on those things that can help a lot. Big upside if it works, small downside if it doesn't.
Don't you think it would be good that people would actually take a blank slate every day for maybe 15, 30 minutes and actually see if you are headed in the right direction, given those two concepts, whether you're,
it would be ideal.
giving, huh? Rather than just jumping into your iPhone the second that you wake up in the morning?
Absolutely. I think that would be ideal. But, what I've also learned is give people, first just do a small thing. Like, so when I teach people how to do training, and I'm not a trainer myself, I just figured out some simple things like start with 3 push-ups. Don't go for 30. Start with 3. Because what you want people to do is to say, listen, what excuse do I have to do 3? Nothing. Let me just go down and do 3. But now the question is, now that I'm down there, right, I start feeling silly after a week doing 3. So, okay, I'll do 10, and that's the way. So I would say to people, if daily is impractical, then weekly, right? At least weekly. Take that one morning, Sunday morning, Saturday morning, and just same exercise. And if weekly is, just do it monthly. And what you'll find out, if you get value from it, you will automatically start thinking, wow, this would be even more valuable if I could do it more frequently.
100%. And because so many people are working so hard and yet not getting, in the back of their mind, they're going, I'm sure I could be getting better results with this much effort. And that's what I think is the crime of people spending so much time working and not enough time in the whole process of everything else that you need to be doing, which is your health, getting your physical self together. Because if you're not here, then who cares if you learn all this? It all failed, your body dropped. And also your relationships, which people don't have time to focus on or will learn how to make relationships work. So their excuse is, well, I'm working on my top priority. And then your significant other people in your life go, good, I'm not your top priority. Therefore, people walk around feeling isolated. And therefore, we have the world we have today.
Yeah, I want to just end off with, I mentioned that there's 4 mistakes that we make when we allocate scarce resources. We do things we shouldn't be doing, right? Things that are not helpful, maybe even harmful, or they're not helpful a lot. We don't do the things that we should. We do the things that we should, but in the wrong way. We multitask, we don't focus and finish. But the 4th mistake is what I want to end up with, is we don't learn from experience. And it turns out that we actually don't learn from experience. We learn from experiments, not from experience.
Can you say more about that? I think that's profound.
So when I touch a hot stove plate, right, it's very easy to learn from it because I get feedback immediately, right? Yeah. So now I have a new heuristic that I've developed. Touch a hot stove plate and I get burned. Don't do that. Don't enjoy that, all right? But imagine if that stove plate burnt you a day later or a week later. How long will it take you to learn from that experience? Versus saying that I'm launching a new product. I don't want to fail faster. I want to learn faster. How do I learn faster? As I design an experiment that says, these are my key assumptions that I make. What's the fastest possible way of validating or invalidating these assumptions? Right? So I'll end up with applying it to hopefully something that will resonate with all of you. Is we did a very interesting research project a few years ago. We got a bunch of data from people that met during a speed date, 2 minutes, and they lived happily ever after. And you think, how can that be? Right? I don't know about you, but many people had multiple dates and multiple years before they got married and then still divorced. And what we found out is that when you time constrain the brain and you make it pay attention to only what really, really matters to you, it turns out that there's only two things that really matters about a partner. Is can they make you feel special and safe?
Yes.
That's it. So the way to turn that into an experiment is if you're meeting a new person, whether it's a romantic partner or business partner, that's what will make the partnership good, is when both of you can make each other feel special and safe. So my recommendation is start off with a list. What makes you feel special and what makes you feel unspecial? What makes you feel safe and what makes you feel unsafe? And just swap the list. And try to come up with simple experiments that you can test and get fast feedback whether you are able to make your partner feel special and safe and not unspecial and unsafe, and vice versa. So that to me is what I want to end off is, I think the by far the biggest mistake we make is we don't learn from experience, because you can't learn from experience. There's always a lag between causes and effects. It's actually really hard to challenge your own beliefs, because you have a belief, your mind goes and looks for evidence, right? You say, I can't trust men. Guess what? Your mind will find evidence that you can't trust men, or that this will never work. Now you're looking for evidence that it will never work, or I'm unlovable. So you look for evidence that it's really hard to actually challenge assumptions. The way to challenge them is set up experiments where you can test, is this true or not? So if somebody says, my dad doesn't love me because he's never told me he loves me, I say, okay, your assumption is he doesn't love you. I want you to write down, he does love me. Now look for evidence that he does love you. You actually have to design the experiment to go and look for evidence for the opposite of what you believe. That's the way that we can learn from experience, by learning from experiments.
And Alan, real quickly, make sure everybody knows if they wish to reach you, how they would do that.
So I have a website, dralanbarnard.com, but I'll type in my email address in the chat. It's just alan@goldredresearchlabs.com. We have a whole range of apps under harmonyapps.com. And I have a YouTube channel where we've got hundreds of hours of lectures, etc., that I post on there. So that's another resource that's available for anybody that wants to learn more.
Alan, you were very gracious. I appreciate it very much.
Dulcie has a question. Can you have Dulcie last question?
Sure.
Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Jay. Amazing presentation. Thank you so very much. I have a quick question. In my particular case, maybe the case of many in this call, I run different companies. So I have been getting better and better and set priorities and delegate and organize. But sometimes I find myself in a predicament because every company has their own set of priorities. And so, sometimes they are just throw me out of the loop because there are emergencies that require for me to concentrate on what's urgent or what is really important. So any tip or best practice that you can recommend to me when I'm running, an orchestra, different instruments at the same time?
Yeah. No, that's kind of part of what we do is to say, when you have multiple customers, they all want you to give them the highest priority. They want you to make reliable commitments. When you are multitasking, when you're constantly switching, you have no way of knowing when you will be able to complete their work. It's complete random. The only way to know confidently when you will complete their work is by doing it in a focus finish way, to say, so you've got A, B, C, I'm going to work on A, B, C, right? So if D comes in, right? If you were doing A, B, C in that way, D comes in, you say, we'll probably start on day 31. It normally takes us about 10 days to do this. We'll finish on day 40. Make sense? But now imagine you were multitasking and D comes in. So now every day you go A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Not only D will be much later, but A, B, and C will now be much later. If it took you 60 days, it's now going to take you 90 days. So you can never make reliable commitments if you're multitasking. The only way is to do it in this focus and finish way, so that when another thing comes in, you can ask them, right? How does this fit with these priorities? If you're prepared to pay me a premium, maybe I can fit you in earlier, and then I will move up everything. So the planning part that Nick spoke about is really important. And there's some simple techniques of how to plan these very, very complex projects, but in a very simple way of thinking about focusing and finishing.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm driving, so I'm taking longer to unmute. So thank you so much. I probably have more questions, a bit more profound, but I will send you an email.
Yeah, and by the way, that's a great way of getting your average price for your product or service, to go higher, right? As you say to them, we normally quote 3 months for this. How important it is. We can do it in 2 months, but at a 50% premium. Is it important enough for you? And then we can do it in 2 months. And that's a way that you can get your average capacity, your average price to go up, but also it's a practical way of then prioritizing. To say, if you're prepared to pay high, like what Uber is doing, right? Is their surge pricing. They basically say to you, listen, if you need a car now, it'll cost you 4 times as much. If you can wait 30 minutes, rather wait. It's a very practical way of allowing customers to determine whether they are time sensitive or not, rather than you having to balance, and making sure that everybody feels important. If you say, how important is time for you? Are you willing to pay more? If not, then it's not important, and then I'll make a commitment. Will we fit you in at the end of the queue?
Last question. So many people complain that they don't see the right thing to do right now. And often whenever I sit down with them, the problem is they have so much opportunity, they can't even tell what the right thing to do is. And they're looking for a gut reaction, or they want a friend to tell them, or their wife or their husband, whatever, and say something about that, that really what's going on is you have so many opportunities that would pay off.
Yeah. And I think, Barry, that often happens is, people get overwhelmed and they don't even know where to start. So we think that they're lazy or they procrastinate or they're scared. They just don't even know where to start. And we use that multitasking example to show them, to say, listen, say you're a kid, right? You don't know what to go and study. What advice would you give the kid? Let's go and try everything on your list that you find interesting. Go and figure out a way of trying it out, and then decide, because most of the time you only know once you do it. One of my quotes is, always check your assumptions before you act, unless acting is the only way of checking. Right? We can sit here and argue in a Zoom call about what's the best or what's the highest, or we can just go and do it and check.
Yes, the checking.
And that to me is like, just start something, because as soon as you start something, you'll start feeling more productive, your energy levels will come back. And that's why I always start small, do 3 push-ups, right? Just do something. And then you'll find out is once you start, it's like just getting to the gym. Once you're there, you'll think, okay, bloody hell, now that I'm down here, what else can I do? I teach the same thing for failing. Now that I'm down here, I failed, what can I pick up? What can I learn from this thing? So I'm constantly learning from failures.
Yes, constantly. We have a program every day. We check 8 specific areas to see whether you're going forward or backward or anywhere. It's not what your score is. It's just the fact that you actually look and can tell which direction you're going, and then see what do I need to apply, which you would never do unless you gave yourself a score. You would just never do it because I'm too busy trying to keep up.
Yeah, and I think that's a great advice is that we have good intuition about whether we're making progress or not. I can't tell you how much more I love my wife, but I can tell you whether I love her about the same or more or much more or less or much less, right? And based on that, we should maybe have a sit down and talk about it, right?
This is good. This is good. Oh, Jay, thank you so much for bringing this luminary on this topic. We all need to talk about more and more, because the correlation of Thoreau and Emerson, that people live lives of quiet desperation, and yet they don't think they should, but they just don't know how to get out of it. So then they either self-medicate or TV or something like that. Whereas if we could just have people feel that what he's talking about, the feeling of competence, that they're actually getting something done, then that pulls you forward. You don't need so much positive thinking. You just need to get in there and find something that's working just a little bit, and then further on that. Yeah. It's so great what you've been saying. I can't wait to see what all your apps are. Where do we find the apps?
Harmonyapps.com.
Harmonyapps.com. Okay.
Very good.
And if they want to send you something, it goes to email as well.
Just alan@goldredresearchlabs.com. I'll put it in the chat.
Alan, you did very well. We're very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
The one thing that I hope I'm demonstrating to you is there are experts out there that have taken understanding to a higher level.
Yes.
And I'm thrilled that they are able to share freely with you. But the key to everything is none of these people want to be intellectual entertainment. They want to be catalysts of action, movement, Everybody, I'm thrilled, and I hope I can keep contributing in things that really help you get the most out of Barry. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Barry. I also have to run, but if there's any questions, please just send me an email, and I'm happy to do another Zoom call with anyone that has some follow-up questions.
There'll be so many questions they will send to me, and then I'll send them on to you, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Have
much.
a great weekend. Bye.
Okay, thank you for being available. Thank you. Okay, everybody who's still on, and those people will be listening later, thank you very much. Is there anybody have a question or something that you want to bring up about the session or the other sessions that are coming?
Absolutely fantastic. So much stuff implementable.
Excellent today. Really enjoyed it. I learned a lot.
Yeah. You can see the PCG is we're getting just the most elite people to speak to this very small, important group, which you're a member of. And because you all have been there, done that, and now it's going to take this kind of information for you to realize, oh gosh, I learned a bit in doing the other thing, but now there's a whole lot more if I implement it. And so we all need to get into the learning process. And that's the only reason I love the energy massively, is because it allows us to expand every day in terms of knowledge, physical prowess, and flexibility. And you could see what's required with Alan today is that flexibility, testing, flexibility, testing. It's not the decision. The data's in the experiment. No one's running the experiment. No one's actually checking. So what you all have to do each day, and I know that you think that either your facilitator or me is going, okay, what did you do on number 3? What did you do on number 5? When you fill out your sheet each day, and you see how that gets validated. I didn't know he was going to validate it so well, but he validated the entire human brain structure as how it interfaces with the matrix, and that we get in this momentum that unless you do experiments every day, you will not know. And somebody on another side of the world is going to bypass you. Or as they say in China, don't trip or fall down, because in a moment, someone will be standing in your shoes. Because the world changes that fast. In other words, the fact is that you can move into a broader perspective of life, but we don't think so. We end up just talking in a momentum. Say you have kids. Well, you talk to what your kids are they okay? And then you figure out, okay, I guess I'm okay. Is business okay? Well, I guess that's okay. Is retirement okay? I guess that's okay. Is my health okay? I guess that's okay. None of that is experimentation. All of that is a momentum play. So when he comes back, I'm going to bring up a lot of questions that I know you all have specifically, and we should submit all of them about your particular business and what you'd like to accomplish. So Dulcie, with her 3 or 4 companies trying to decide, and plus more opportunities in each one of you, you don't want to get stuck in something, because you're the kind of people that once you get involved, you're committed 100%. And then you just stay in there and do it. It doesn't even matter if it's difficult. It doesn't even matter if it's going against you. You then pull out the Rambo and say, well, I'll just stick it out and I'll make it happen. Now that may work in the movies. I don't think, from what I've seen in terms of total success, it works in terms of keeping up with the speed of change of existence, of life, and life's, most importantly, life's opportunities. So many people, once they stop doing one thing, they're so sad or so depressed about something. And then all of a sudden this huge opportunity comes in. They go, God, I never had time to see that. Or they get involved in being angry or upset about something. And once they stop doing that, they see there was all these other opportunities they missed while they were getting distracted by that. So does anybody have a comment on that, on you doing your energy practices and how that can augment your being more and more perceptive each day? That's why I do it. It makes you younger, more perceptive, and more flexible. I'd love some comments on that so y'all can share and see why taking that break each day actually starts a better day rather than just momentum your way through it. Please go ahead.
Well, Alan's comment on the best day versus the average day, I liked what he did there. And it's true. Here recently, I've had my best day when I've done my energy practices, a lot of energy practices. I've basically come to the conclusion the more energy practices you do during the day, the better your day is versus just an average day. So, and I attribute that to the source energy. So you made a believer out of me, and I'm in it.
It's all physics, and that's the only thing to believe in, is the fact that every day it seems like gravity's in play. So I know I got to do my exercises. Until I see my shoes on the ceiling, I know I got to get up and get going. But I check every morning to see if the game's changed. And when I notice there's no shoes on the ceiling, they're all on the floor, and nothing has altered from the basic laws of physics, then I got to go find out what's changed in terms of human interaction, because human interaction is changing so fast. If you don't forward it by anything that you're interested in having happen as a human being, nature will return it to entropy. The banana will rot as soon as you open it up. If you don't put it in the cold or take care of it, eat it, it will turn black and then it's unedible. And almost everything is set up that way because the forces of nature, whichever way you want to look at what's controlling everything, actually has got it set up so that there's unending opportunity. And if you don't get the unending opportunity, there's all the other stuff that we all wonder why you have to experience that, because we're not quick enough to get smarter and to wake up and to keep thinking. People get lost in whatever conversations in their head or whatever momentum, and none of that is producing a great result given this exact moment right now, which has not ever existed before. You can't stick your hand in the same place in a river even twice, only one time, and the river keeps moving. And we'd all like to say, well, we're just not up for that. We're just not up for that kind of competition. But it isn't competition. It's more or less the opportunity to, like when you're struggling on a bicycle until finally you discover the energy flow, and then you can do it. I think what's missing, Alan, in almost everybody's repertoire is that I don't know how I can do it, but I know I can do it with the energy. And until you make that shift, you're just not going to fill out your list of what was your best day. And I think everybody, before you get off the call, should actually list what he called when you look back at your best day. It may have been when you were at Amherst, on a full scholarship and everything was going your way, relationship wise, financial wise, food wise, friend wise. What were all those elements? And then that's knowledge. Then how could you apply that? Can you think of what your best day was? Can you actually think? And what categories of things that were present that allowed you to be so successful? And if you can formalize what those things were in terms of activities, planning, people you're interacting with, those things replicated are part of your energy system channels that are already open. So if you apply that to whatever you want to do, even if it's writing a book or going to become a marathon or whatever, those things will then support you more than just winging it. Which you have to make a list. No one wants to take the time to make a list because we're too, we're too believing we shouldn't have to. We really hold it that we shouldn't have to, and because we're already too busy. Like he said, that people have this complaint. I think we should end on that. Is people have the complaint saying, well, I'm too busy or it's impossible for me now. And that just takes you off the hook rather than the fact that that's a sucker's play. It's a loser's play. It's not the way to get out of the Sinai desert and get into the promised land. You are not going to get out if you think it's impossible. It's got to be, okay, it's not understandable yet, but definitely I don't want to say it's impossible. Now what? And that's why the templates we've got in all the, and I'm going to share those with the other Alan, when we have our talk, the templates we've got on the For Me, the template on the short-term, long-term benefits and deficits, on being able to make any decisions. He's interested, and it should be good to have him come back. Anybody else want to say anything?
Go ahead, Nick.
I think I've lived a whole life, and I'm new to this, but I've lived a whole life of listening to wonderful, inspirational thinking like we just heard. And this is taking a whole new change in my life. I mean, I've gotten amazing education, but the meaning behind it and the profoundness behind it, when married with the work of this energy work that you're talking about, Barry, it changes the whole game. I mean, I'm brand new to this. I'm about a week into this, I'm floating, I should say. But this was, for me, bigger than I thought it would be, because everything about it made me think about how this really does play in the energy practice, and the energy practice play into what I just learned. And so this is very special. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Nicholas. People who listen to this, who weren't able to make it exactly, everybody's been calling me and saying, when is it going to be up, and that they can listen to it in their app. And I want to listen to it again too myself. So do we have the information on that, Faye?
I think it'll be a couple of days. What we'll do is we'll post on Signal when it's up, just so no one's missing it, and let them know as soon as it's on the app for them.